I'm Curt Dupriez, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the 2025 Kia EV3, which perhaps confusingly is the fourth EV branded EV in Kia's lineup, which includes 5 EVs. Fear not maths fans, because there is some logic at play. The number does refer to size and body style rather than chronology. And the EV3 is Kia's small electric SUV. Further up the tree for both price and size is the EV5 midsize SUV, the EV6 liftback, and the Big Daddy upper large EV9 electric SUV. And then there's the little Nero EV that doesn't get a number and doesn't really sit in the family, so no one really talks about it. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car.
Brought to you by
Budget Direct.
And right out of the gate, things get pretty interesting in Kia's EV land, particularly when it comes to pricing. Unsurprisingly, the smallest in Kia's EV lineup is also the cheapest, with this base Air lobbing in at around 49 grand drive away. Range, well, it's a pretty decent 436 kilometres, Kia says, and that's right where it needs to be in 2025. But there are 4 variants to choose from, which is a lot for a small SUV lineup. So once you climb over the Air long range and the Earth, you do get to the GT line flagship, which does cost around 70 grand drive away. And here's where it gets a little bit dangerous, because within that 20k price band, you will find a lot of EV alternatives, and plenty of those will be wearing other Asian, US or Euro nameplates. In that danger zone, you'll also find the recently updated Tesla Model Y, as well as the larger EV5, which, unlike the front drive EV3, can be had with all-wheel drive. So what separates the EV3 from some of the larger and fruitier alternatives for similar money? Well, for a start, it's actually made in South Korea. Does country of origin matter? Well, to some buyers, it most definitely will. To some, China is fast becoming the world's attainable EV sausage factory. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But a Korean car like the EV3 has a chance to have a feel and vibe that it hasn't been pumped out of the same sausage factory. The other point of difference is that EV3 has its own bespoke ride handling and steering tune developed here in Australia for Australia, which can be a bit of an advantage over the great slew of its rivals, apart from Big Brother EV5. This is the price-busting entry-level Air standard version, but I have driven all 4 variants at the local launch, so here's a quick rundown. The Air fits a 150 kilowatt and 283 Newton meter electric motor driving the front wheels. It fits a 58.3 kilowatt hour battery, and it sits on pretty modest 17-inch rolling stock. An extra 7.5 grand gets you this same car, but in long range. It gets an 81.4 kilowatt hour battery and a claim of around 600 kilometers. Then it's another 6 grand to the mid-grade Earth, which gets fancier styling 19-inch wheels and interior upgrades. And another 6 grand again for the full fat GT line, which gets a really sporty vibe and a want-for-nothing feature set. But here are some really crucial things that you should consider. Bar the smaller and 80 kilograms lighter battery in this base car, all EV3s are identical under the skin. So that extra 20 grand splurge for the GT line doesn't actually give you any more performance. In fact, the Earth and GT line are actually 4/10 slower than the base car, which clocks in at 7.5 seconds, 0 to 100 kilometers an hour. Then there are the safety and assistance smarts. There's a whole slew of them in EV3, and every single variant gets exactly the same suite. There's also a lot of commonality on the interiors too, but before we dive in there, it would be remiss not to touch on its exterior styling. Kia's EV design ethos is, well, polarizing. And the EV3 Air gets a look that maybe only a mother would love. Well, at least someone's mother. I strongly suspect that Kia's designers have downplayed the look of the Air in order to encourage buyers up into the Earth or the flagship GT line, which is certifiably handsome. So what about the cabin? Let's check it out. At just 4.3 metres in length, the EV3 is certifiably small, but Kia has done a pretty good job of packaging in here to make it feel pretty roomy, although it's nowhere near as roomy as the larger EV5. The bottom of the range Air does get this sort of fairly drab mid-grey effect, although Kia has given it a little bit of two-tone effect to give it a bit of a lift. The cloth trim on the seats is pretty decent, however, the real disappointment is just how hard and shiny the plastic is on the door cards. The stronger two-tone effect that you do get in the GT line is a lot more flamboyant, and you do notice it in the richness of the materials and the detailing and the fit out. But probably the worst of it in the Air cabin are these seats. They're very stiff back, only have mechanical adjustment, and you can really tell that they're separating the trim grades by putting much better pews in higher variants. When you do move up the range, you do get what's called the premium relaxation seats, which have 10-way electric adjustment and 2-way air cell lumbar. The Air also gets this sort of bland, chunky 2-spoke wheel that looks like it was designed by Fisher-Price. But the real positive upshot in any of the EV3s is that it has a thoroughly conventional interior design. So it's really familiar and it largely mirrors its internal combustion siblings. Kia has neatly sidestepped some of that electro weirdburger stuff that you get in so many Chinese EVs, and all the better for it. It's particularly good news for new EV adopters because it makes the transition into EV ownership that much more accessible. Despite the doubtiness, the good news in here is that some of the big ticket items such as the tech is carried through on all variants. So even this version gets the dual 12.3 digital curved display. It's also split by this neat little 5-inch screen for the HVAC controls, and every version gets dual zone climate control with dual USB-C ports in the front and in the rear. There's also a neat hidden vehicle to load 3-pin plug underneath the base of the rear seat. Nor is the media system stingy, so even the base car gets proprietary sat-nav and wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, as well as a nifty inductive phone charging pad. And for your extra 20 grand splurge, the GT line only really adds Harman Kardon sound and a head-up display in terms of in-cabin tech. In terms of software, it's the usual mainstream Hyundai and Kia stuff, so it's quick to react, it's nice and bright, but it's not the slickest look out there. Nice conventional touches are the conventional stop-start button and toggle switches for the climate control so you don't have to dig through the menus. Right, let's check out row 2. The second row is where the business starts to get a bit risky for the EV3. It's spaced like a small SUV, so legroom is limited, and because of the battery under the floor, you get a raised seat base, so you do get this sort of stadium seating arrangement. And the net effect is that does impinge on your headroom quite a lot, and you do feel quite hemmed in here. Now this isn't such bad news for the Air with the price starting from the 4, but once you start getting into the fancier variants, you really do have so many other options out there that give you so much room in the second row. And that certainly includes Kia's own larger EV5. Then there's boot space. Now Kia is claiming that it's 460 litres, even with the floor in its highest position. But it certainly doesn't look like it. There is an adjustable floor, and underneath there's a cubby space for charging cables, a tyre inflator kit, and a hole that's big enough for a full-size spare that clearly isn't installed. So why no spare wheel? Well, Kia reckons that it does save on weight, cost, and improves range. But if you remove the back seat from the EV3, you would also remove cost, weight, and improve range, but it wouldn't exactly make for a better SUV experience, would it? To be fair, the weight of a spare wheel and a jack capable of 2 tons, because this is a hefty unit, would be quite excessive, but it should at least be an option or a dealer fit accessory. All EV3s at the moment are front wheel drive. Now Kia Australia tells us that there is a dual motor all-wheel drive version coming, as well as a high performance GT. But given the GT line's currently 7 grand, it's going to be really expensive. But back to the test at hand. This Air standard range ought to be the nicest to drive around town because it is the lightest of the lineup. If you call around 1800 kilos light, and it does wear chubby 17-inch tyres to take the edge off the ride. And so it proves. If there's one thing that's instantly recognisable here is that it is a very resolved thing to drive. Unlike so many Chinese competitors that really feel unsorted and poorly calibrated, the EV3 does feel just refined and polished. And that extends to the driver assist. You do still have to turn off a couple of those systems before you set off for a drive, lest they bleed at you. But it's pretty good once it's on the move. Even the usually insufferable driver monitoring system, which isn't mandatory in Australia, is well calibrated in this car, which makes for a fuss-free day-to-day experience. The brake regeneration is adjustable through paddle shifters on the steering wheel through 4 modes, and it'll do 1 pedal mode in every single forward mode as well as in reverse. But where the EV3 really transcends just simply doing normal stuff well is when it comes to ride, handling and steering. Now Kia Australia is usually pretty good at this stuff, but the EV3 really is that team's best work, which is really more than can be said from the relatively unpolished EV5. Australia gets unique springs, dampers and anti-roll bar spec. And across all manner of acne and road bumps, the ride is wonderfully compliant. The underpinnings are also taut and quiet, and there's a real solidity to its manner on the road. However, I have noticed that these tyres can drum up quite a bit of road noise on coarse chip surfaces. The steering is even, measured and nicely weighted. It gets its own unique mapping here in Australia, and it brings a real sort of fluidity to the on-road experience. Head out of town, find some curves, and the EV3 really does have a keen and wonderfully balanced nature. Now, it's no sports car, and those 215mm Kumos do present some limitations in grip when you do start pushing on. But even the base EV3 is hugely cooperative to the driver's whims. It does do a wonderfully good job of masking that 1.8 tons worth of mass, and it's deceptively athletic. Now, at 150 kilowatts and 283 newton meters going through the front wheels, that's not really a recipe for heroics, and the EV3 doesn't need it. However, in the real world, it's really responsive and punchy, and a real hoot around town. In eco or comfort mode, the throttle is nice and progressive, and none of that silly peakiness like you get in Teslas. But activate sport mode, and there are enough herbs underfoot to really get those front wheels spinning up against the traction control system. The EV3 Air Standard really is as quick as a sub $50,000 EV needs to be. And the best part is it's easily accessible pace that's as rewarding around town as it is when you stretch its legs out on a country road. Speaking of road tripping, what about recharging along the way? Well, Kia says that the base Air will recharge in 29 minutes for the 10 to 80% charge, and about 2 minutes longer for the big battery versions. Kia does claim that the EV3 is 350 kilowatt DC charger capable, but we'll have to put that to the test another time. It gets Kia's excellent 7-year unlimited kilometre warranty, except for the high voltage stuff, which is 7 years and 150,000 kilometres. Consumption, well, Kia claims it's 14.9 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometres. And in our test, it seems pretty much bang on the money, which gives you around about 400 kilometres of real world range. The Air long range, well, 600 kilometres is going to be essential for some, but it's really going to be a luxury for a good many buyers. It's 563 kilometres of range for the mid-grade Earth and the GT line if you can stomach the price. And right here is really a sticking point for the EV3 pitch. Having driven the entire lineup recently, I can tell you that yes, the GT line is the nicest and the most attractive variant, if you can stomach the cost. But at 70k drive away, it doesn't make a lot of sense, particularly when you can get the larger EV5 with all-wheel drive for around about the same money in Earth trim. The Earth variant, well, with its nicer seats, big wheels, and pleasing specifications, it probably would be the Goldilocks trim if its price didn't start with a 6. And as mentioned before, that $7.5 grand splurge for the long range Air doesn't really cut it if you're not using that 600 kilometres of range. So the real sweet spot in this range for me is this base Air. Price is nice, the range is competitive, and it gets all the tech, all the safety, and exactly the same underpinnings as the rest of the lineup. Not only is the Air Standard the quickest in its own lineup, has one of the best powertrains and the nicest drives of any mainstream EV. And that's thankful because you don't have to look at it while you're driving it. But that's just me. How about you? Put your thoughts in your comments below. Don't forget to subscribe while you're at it. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.